Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chai Time Data Science Show. In this episode, I interview the Chief Security Scientist, Dr. Ashrith from H2O.ai. And as you can guess, we talk all about cybersecurity and AI broadly speaking, in this episode. Ashrith has a background in cybersecurity and has done a lot of interesting research in the field. And he's also currently doing applied research, so to speak, at H2O.ai, which of course we talk all about. We discuss about cybersecurity, generally speaking, and its applications in AI. This is, I know, a first on this podcast series, so I'm really excited to be sharing this with you. We also talk a lot about anti-money laundering and the applications that H2O is working on in the cybersecurity domain. If you'd like to know more about all of these amazing things, Ashrith will be doing a lot of webinars soon. Again, please scroll down to the show notes if you like to check them out. For now, here's my interview with Ashrith, all about cybersecurity, anti-money laundering, artificial intelligence, and applied AI in this domain. Please enjoy the show. Hi everyone, this is a first unique on the series where I will be talking all about cybersecurity, but I'm on the call with Dr. Ashrith. Thank you so much, Ashrith, for joining me on the Chai Time Data Science podcast.
Thanks, Sanyam. Maybe we'll keep the doctor part to people who save lives, and you can just call me Ashrith. That would be fantastic. Thanks for inviting me for Chai Time.
Awesome. Now I want to start by talking about your background. I'm curious, how did you discover your passion for machine learning? You followed a learning path in cybersecurity and research. Where did machine learning start to come into the picture for you?
So that's actually a very good question. Maybe it'll help out people who are seeking something similar. So after I finished my master's, I had this real itch for research. I wanted to do a lot of research in the field of cybersecurity. And it so happened that a lot of research that was actually being done was very operational, in the sense someone's trying to hack you, so we'll just prevent you kind of a thing. What I wanted to do was much more analysis, which was, can I use algorithms? Can I use mathematical or statistical models to actually detect these things? And that's how I ended up at Purdue, and my advisor, Dr. William S. Cleveland, is one of the really well-known network security researchers in the field, like from a statistics point of view. And so what I did was always very statistical. We used like random forests and we use SVMs and these kind of things, but it was never put under the umbrella of data science. And to be very honest, when you're in the when I was in school, the concept of data science had not evolved. So just start analysis, analytics. And even when I was looking out for a job, it was like, an analyst job would be great, is how we were thinking about it.
Okay.
But I got a bit of an exposure to the Bay Area. And then, the term data science came in. And that's how I probably moved towards the field.
Okay. Is it common in your field for an outsider talking about statistical analysis? Is that common in cybersecurity?
So when I started, it was definitely not that common. There were only a few people who had actually published papers. using the approach that I had spoken about before me, and they were like the pioneers of people who did it. It is still not common because one of the things about cybersecurity is it's always very reactive, which means that you're always firefighting. You're not thinking in the future. So which essentially means that it's more operational than algorithmic. So it's still not uncommon, is what I would say. I mean, it's still not common, is what I would say. Sorry, yeah.
Okay. Now, before we talk about the intersection, can you tell us more about your passion for cybersecurity? When did that happen? And asking for a friend, can you retrieve someone's Facebook messages if they've been blocked?
So I think these kind of questions have been asked for quite some time. I would like to say I think these kind of things are not something that you're supposed to do. But if people are motivated enough, I think you can get these. You can do these things. So having said this, one of the things that I was always very interested in is from a very generic point of view, I just wanted to see how things, how components come together, how things break apart, and how what are the weaknesses, kind of a thing. It was not necessarily from a software point of view. It was from a larger computer's point of view. And then when you get into like a field very specific to trying to see vulnerabilities in like software, then it becomes much more interesting. And that's where I kind of got into the idea of cybersecurity itself, which eventually led to my interest in actually be like an active penetration tester, in my master's. And after that, going into much more research in the field of cybersecurity, try and identify people who are doing these kind of things, something that I did much before, as a part of my master's program and my internship and all those things, to try and see if mathematical models or statistical models for that matter can actually identify this behavior. Or can we build models that can identify this behavior is how I would say the progression went through. But coming back to your friend's question, I think all technologies are vulnerable. So, if this is something as an experiment that you would want to try.
We'll be back after a break, dear audience. Kidding aside, now I want to talk about where you're still following your passion at H2O.ai. What problems are you working on? What does a day in your life currently look like?
That's actually a pretty big question. Maybe I'll break it apart into a few things. So one of the primary, the general umbrella that I work in is in the area of identifying malicious behavior. And I started off with the field of cybersecurity, focused heavily on network security, trying to identify malicious behavior, through network traffic. And what that eventually led us to is to add many different kinds of behaviors into my portfolio. So right now, I also look at electronic fraud. I also look at money laundering as a part of this larger scope of things that I research in. We also look at other kinds of malicious, other kinds of larger state acting malicious behavior as a part of this entire portfolio as well. And we essentially build models for all of these things for different organizations. Sorry, I think I forgot the second question.
What does a day in your life currently look like?
So in a day, I would actually say a big part of my work is still testing models, is still building and testing models, is also researching what are the different approaches that I can use. But one of the things that I am very passionate about, if you would want to identify something in a much smaller, like a sliver of across whatever I've said, is to actually see everything that I build, like a model that I build, to be taken to a point where it's completely applied. Because mind you, when I'm building a model, if I build a model and it's a fantastic model, I'm only satisfying the data scientist in me or the analyst in me. But if I take that model and put it into a solution and solve someone's network security problem, like let's say an analyst who's sitting on the other end, and this analyst, he or she, has a lot of false positives in their network, information or the network attacks or alerts. And if my model can solve that, if it can reduce the number of false positives, give them much more accurate information, then I've solved a real world problem. I've actually done some applied, problem solving kind of a thing. And getting things end to end, literally from like science here to applied solutions, is what I'm actually very passionate about in getting done. And that's what I focus on in my day-to-day activities.
Where does H2O come into the picture? H2O to the world is the AutoML company. Where does AutoML come into the picture, so to speak?
So yes. I'm guessing you're talking about AutoML when we say AML, or is it?
AutoML, because you mentioned you're building models and AutoML is supposed to replace you.
Oh yeah, of course. So one of the big things that we always have to focus on is the idea that eventually systems will take over human beings. And essentially what you have to do is you have to train the systems enough to understand how you're thinking. Because mind you, with the number of attacks that happens, with the number of alerts that are generated, with the number of things that are becoming digital or electronic for that matter, and systems being interconnected, we will not, regardless of what rate the population explodes, we will not have enough manpower to identify all this behavior. So which essentially means that a lot of things needs to be handed off to systems, which also includes intelligence. And one of that intelligence aspect is the very kernel of how H2O fits in. Or H2O's AutoML for that matter fits in, or even if you want to be much more specific, the whole aspect of how driverless AI fits into the whole equation. It gives us the ability to build models. It gives us the ability to refine the models, tune the models for different kinds of variations in behaviors. Be it change in data, be it periodicity, seasonality, any of these things. And I think that is, and the fact that you can get a model from conceptual to actual production very quickly gives you the ability to just come a bit closer to that situation where I was telling you about, where machines should be doing a lot more work, to support us.
So you're on the side of robots in the robots versus human race.
On the contrary, I'm actually a Luddite, to be very honest. I like to do things I like to do things with my own hands, kind of thing, is how I approach it. But the reality is that these things are going to explode, exponentially. And you are better off handing it off to an intelligent system than trying to make things work and losing out, in the process.
I think it's similar to creativity in general. Before the call, you were making coffee, and coffee makers are now automated. You don't need to manually figure out. That's what maybe data science will be in a few years now.
I would agree. I would agree, but just like how there are spaces where coffee handmade is slightly better than coffees that are made out of machines.
For the very niche, expert, handmade, very exclusive clubs.
I completely agree with you. Although I do like machine coffee, I'd have to tell you that. Okay. The same way, a data scientist, for that matter, would be able to polish the pre-made model by a system or by an automated system to just give it that edge to be better. And that is how you could see your work as, or as you yourself as a data scientist, you could see your work the same way.
Okay. Now coming to application that I think you recently interested in, you've been working on anti-money laundering. Why is it even a thing in 2020? Everything's digital. How is money being laundered in 2020?
So this is like a fantastic question that you put out, and it might even come out as, wait, you working in cybersecurity and then money laundering. But what when I'm sure that would have probably been your next question. So one of the things was that I could see while I was exploring a lot of behavior, I saw a lot of behavior that that I was looking while I was studying network behavior, was that there were a lot of similarities in papers that were published about fraud and money laundering and these kind of things. So I kind of started to explore a bit more about that. And then what we did is we engaged with a few clients to work on these aspects as well. And the thing is, almost always people want to save up on what they have to pay the state. And, of course, these are not, this is not ethical, not moral, any of those things.
Yeah.
But they just want to try and evade the system as much as possible, and which is one of the reasons money laundering exists. In old school, it was very similar, where you set up shell corporations in like different countries, then just move the money around and you're done, right? In the current day, it's because it's digital, it's fantastic. Like you can move. When I say fantastic, I say it with a bit of responsibility in terms of how money laundering is happening.
Mm-hmm.
There are, the way money laundering is done using electronic means itself is just, it's so well done that it becomes really, really difficult for identifying. And because the crooks are also growing with how, it's like a generational change that they're undergoing as well. So which still makes it an important aspect for, today's, something that needs to be focused on today. And yes, which is why 2020 is still relevant for my life.
How do we end up?
That was long-winded. Yeah, it's just, yeah.
How do we end up automating the process? Since you mentioned it's beautiful in a sense how people evade this, beautiful in not the real fashion, but it needs a lot of human expertise. How can we ensure that whatever models that we or driverless AI builds are robust enough, are of the human expert level?
Fair enough. So that's I would see that as like a much more like a technically rooted question, right? So the idea is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify behavior. Now, anything out of the ordinary, be it like an attack on a network or be it you siphoning out money, is going to stand out. Okay, but the important thing is with reference to what is the big question. Like if you want something to pop out or be seemingly visible compared to something else, the thing that you're comparing to needs to also establish like a baseline for something to pop out. And the models that we build essentially, the features that we build essentially does that.
Okay.
Now these, go ahead. I think you had a question in the middle.
No.
Okay. Yeah. So the features that we build are so tuned to actually pop out unique behaviors that you could have normally not seen. I mean, for example, if an investigator were to look at behaviors in the last week, he or she might not see anything interesting. But now, if you were to look at a long-term shift about how much money or how much transaction a certain account was doing, there could have been a steady shift, or there could have been a spike, that happened much before, a week before, which the investigator might not have sights on. And that is essentially what the model captures. The model is capable of going long, far, and wide and deep, which for humans we're limited. We're not smart, but we are limited because there is only certain amount of information that we can process at a given point in time. But that limitation does not exist with these features or models or systems. And essentially, when you add these features, the models have the good capability to pick these things up. And that's where, driverless AI comes into the picture. You have these fantastic features that are identified, for use cases, and the models in driverless AI are able to pick up on these features. And then, your model is highly likely to be, a good predictor of what money laundering is. And that's essentially how we go about building the model.
This is actually pretty interesting because someone would assume that a human expert needs to spot those errors, and you're talking about the model being robust enough to actually see through things that a human might miss through the fine grains.
Yes, and it's not. I would also be honest enough to say that this is not necessarily in a negative connotation as well, right? Because we as humans, all of us, like you, me, and me, there is a limitation in the amount of information that we can consume. So it's obvious that we'll miss out on something. The only thing that we're saying is, hey, look, when, for example, when you're fatigued, you don't necessarily grab, let's say you're reading a book and you're like tired. you don't necessarily grab all the story that's coming out of the book. Sometimes, which I always do, I go back about 4 pages and I start again, which it's the same. But machines don't have that problem.
Yeah.
Or maybe we still haven't figured out if machines or systems and algorithms have fatigues. I'm sure we'll figure that out later. But they don't have that. So which is one of the reasons, if you can offset these things to a machine, it helps us a lot.
Before we talk about where machines are currently helpful, can you tell us more about the dataset curation process? Because anomalies happen maybe in a ratio of 1:100, maybe less. I'm not sure. But how do we find the right data in place? I couldn't find any proper data sets on Kaggle. Maybe there were 1 or 2 competitions. It's not a common problem, so to speak.
Yes, it's not a common problem, and one of the reasons is because it's heavily guarded, with security. Because one of the things is that when you're looking at these kind of irresponsible behavior, you are necessarily bringing in your organizational risk team, you're bringing in the state, you're bringing in many different agencies. So which essentially means that you have to be very, very, very careful when you're handling this data set, because it's got PII, personalized identifiable information.
Okay.
So you would hardly find, I don't think you would find any data set available online, which should be how it is, how it should be. So which essentially means that a lot of this work actually happens, iteratively, which means that you look at the data, you learn, you build, your first iteration of a model, and then you look at the data again, try different kinds of features, try different kinds of joins, and then iterate the model to be much better. And that's essentially how we have built the whole, the solution space for any of these malicious behaviors using driverless AI.
Okay. Can you speak to where driverless AI is currently being used? What sectors is it being currently deployed across? Maybe the models from driverless or AutoML.
So one of the things that has happened is driverless AI has given organizations that amazing ability to be able to build models and deploy models without having as many data scientists as they would have earlier needed.
I think we need to first clarify for the unknown people, what is driverless AI and how is it related to cybersecurity?
Please. Okay. So, I mean, I think for the people who don't necessarily know what driverless AI is this tool that our company H2O.ai puts out or makes, which basically is a completely machine learning automated tool, and I think it's very popularly called as Kaggler in a box. Or,
yeah.
And what it does is, it has this amazing ability to tune the model, build better features, and do the whole process iteratively, and then give you the best output. And that's essentially how driverless AI works. Now, the way we adopt it for the field of cybersecurity or money fraud or any of these things, or malicious behavior for that matter, is that we tune driverless AI. We rather configure driverless AI with something called as recipes. The idea of recipes is to tell driverless AI that there is a certain design of features that it needs to look for or to explore when it's building the model, which is very specific to a use case. For example, when we're looking at malicious users, I'm going to tell it to look at historical patterns, periodic patterns, anomalies that stand out with a certain statistical effect. Or unique, interesting behavior that never existed. Maybe logs that are incomplete. In terms of money laundering, transactions that that seem to go in circles. For example, in money laundering, there are lots of times when people move the transactions in circles because if money is in transit, which means that they don't necessarily have to pay tax for it, which is one approach that people do as well. So any of these behaviors is actually encoded, like in proper coding. It's not any written language. It's actually encoded and it's provided to driverless AI, which gives driverless AI the ability to actually build models and engineer features that are very much required for this kind of a use case. And that's essentially how it fits. So which is why I would say driverless AI is the kernel in this case, where it's able to build as the model. But once it's built the model, we call back driverless AI again when we want the model to be built again, or when we want to build the model again. But other than that, the output of driverless AI, which is the actual model object, gets deployed.
You mentioned about the configuration. Is this a different version, or is it just a few switches that you toggle to put it into a security mode?
So it's actually very simple. It's when I say configuration, it's the feature. It's the recipes feature that comes out of driverless AI. And the idea is you write a custom recipe for any of the use cases that you're working in. It could be any of the use cases that I'm working in. It could be like which includes the entire spread of malicious behavior across electronic fraud to cybersecurity to transactional and money laundering and all those things. Or it could also be for things like, you want to identify loan default, you want to identify, are you going to have customer churn or any of these use cases. And driverless AI has the capability to ingest any kind of recipe that you provide to adopt that for the use case that you are expecting the model for. So it's you can think of it as, a much more unique customization for the use case that you want to use, that you want to work on.
Okay. Now, this was an interesting tangent. Coming back to where is driverless being used? Any sectors where we're currently using it?
Oh yeah. From what I can see, from what I know, rather, driverless has been adopted across the entire spectrum of all the customers who are using H2O3. H2O3, of course, was is our open source product as well, and it's used across the entire sector. It's used in financial, insurance, manufacturing, supply chain management. I think hardcore security as well. So pharmaceutical, and I think. So these are the ones that probably crop up in my head right away. So I would say that these are groups that they're using, but it's gained the same amount of traction as much as like H2O is widespread.
Any applications of anti-money laundering that come to mind in this broad spectrum?
Yes, of course. In the sense you're saying with respect to driverless AI, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So we've built multiple models for the AML use case itself, which is the anti-money laundering. We use driverless AI as the engine, the very engine to generate the model and to be predictive enough for AML. And that and the driverless AI with the AML solution is something that we've deployed at quite a few organizations to solve their problems.
Any upcoming sectors that you're excited about where we could help with AML or even cybersecurity problems?
So one of the sectors that I'm very excited about is IoT. IoT is a vast space from the malicious behavior, which I always start with, and it's got its influence in the financial sector, like remote payment systems, for that example, or autonomous payment systems, and it's also in the field of cybersecurity. Like IoT is like very important, because you have systems that are not necessarily like managed, but that are very critical in the entire operation space. So I'm very excited to see how that will come about and how we can work with that from a modeling point of view.
To me, this also brings an interesting question. I'm visiting US soon, so I know IRS flags any transactions, I think above $10,000, and it's 50,000 INR for India, which is like $1,000. Does this problem vary from region to region across? This might be a bad example, but do you see any challenges in shifting from region to region or policy changes?
So the thing is, you have to understand where their limits come from, right? Their limits, comes from the idea that, a certain country has certain average income, average, per capita kind of thing. So, that essentially plays a part in setting up the limits. But there are other activities, the kind of activities that they're looking for also plays a very important part in setting up these limits. For example, in Europe, it's much more stringent. In India, it's probably stringent as well. because there might be a lot of activities that are seeping through. In America, it's much more regulated. There is a lot of much of the financial sector has actually moved to an electronic footprint, which means that trackability is easy. It's not a big deal. And this will vary region by region, and that in essence is dependent on what the specific agencies who guide these things think is a reasonable amount that would be threshold, and that's essentially what would drive the entire process.
US, like you said, is a properly regulated, maybe relatively properly regulated region. Do you think how does the future to you look like in regions such as Asia, India, where it's still up and coming? Technology, internet is still still picking up.
I mean, see, the thing is, Asia, all parts of Asia, right? Of course, it's up and coming. There's no question about it. But you do have to understand that there is a fundamental problem that exists. Is that regardless of what you do, regardless of the fact that you use any kind of technology, if you want the technology to be applicable, like let's say you want a large kind of electronic footprint, like the way Europe operates and the way America operates, you would have to deploy the same kind of electronic footprint across Asia. China and India have some innovative banking methods that have come through, like SMS-based banking and all these things, and transactions that can be monitored as well. I think India is coming with the one unique ID, where everybody starts to you're able to unify, any kind of detection if that helps. So what matters is, because the numbers are so big in these in Asia, it's not a matter of will we be able to, it's a matter of when will we be able to. And it's only because the technology has to be applied everywhere. And that's when I think they'll be much more, I would say, effective monitoring and also transparent monitoring, because both sides can see what's happening. If I am falsely flagged, I'll have the ability to, question that. But on the other side, if someone thinks I've actually done some kind of, illegal transaction, then they'll have enough information to flag me for that as well. So it's a problem of numbers, not necessarily, will we be able to do it? So to say, yeah.
You're talking about being flagged up. And H2O already has MLI in our products. How interpretable are these models that we just talked about?
Oh yes. So one of the things that we do when we are building these very unique, specific use cases or specific solutions is that we work very closely with the risk groups of the financial institutions or the organizations that we work with. From cybersecurity, fraud, money laundering, any of these things, right? We actually engage with the risk team, internal risk team, because one of the things that they also have to do is, let's take money laundering for a quick example. Now, when a transaction that seems like money laundering, for a matter of fact, is visible in a bank, it needs to be reported to the state. It's a process that they have to go through, which essentially means that this information is not something that you are keeping it for yourself for your knowledge, but you have to provide it for others as well, and it must be equally informational for them. So, which is one of the reasons what we do is we customize driverless AI to build unique statistical features. So we do a little bit less of feature combinations. Okay. We do a lot more of statistical features, that go into the model. And because these statistical features are naturally interpretable. For example, if I tell you the average amount in a month for a user, you know what it means. I mean, you know it's aggregation of everything divided by the number of records. Simple as that. So it's very intuitive, like easily interpretable, and that's something that we strive for in all of these use cases. And let me give you a quick simple example, if you have the time, for cybersecurity as well. let's say you are the risk officer working in association with the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer of an organization. Now, essentially, what happens then is that if your systems are breached, you're duty bound, to like inform the state as well, inform all the required agencies that you've been hacked. There is a certain loss of data, and these are the customers that you lost. You also have to inform your customers, whose data seems to have been lost, which essentially means that you have to make all these parties, not probably to the same level, but you have to make all these parties understand what actually happened. And if I'm using AI, it behooves me to actually be able to explain these models through explainable features. And it can't be just feature combinations. It has to be explainable features. And which is why we adopt the same approach. We customize driverless AI through recipes, of course, for these kind of features, so that when we're looking at malicious behavior specifically, the thing is the models are super transparent. You're able to explain everything in the model.
Now, broadly speaking, or maybe even naively speaking, how do you convince such regulated industry banks to use AI, something that's maybe like hard to sell, so to speak?
Fair enough. That's a very fair question, I would say. So this is the thing, right? AI is this AI or ML for that matter is this fantastic tool that companies who've got good resources have adopted it, have been very successful. Now, one of the things that is, these companies who have been successful, you can identify them, literally, because these are companies who have large amounts of data. Now, AI, very different to, different approaches of predictive, making models, seeks large amounts of data to be predictive. Now, which essentially means that AI is more observational than, a concept called emergent, where you're actually getting knowledge out of what the model is detecting. So there is a slight difference there. So it's very experimental and observational, while I would say ML is more experimental and observational, while, other forms like old school statistics is more emergent. So what the way you have to convince, regulators is the fact that you don't necessarily show them that large amounts of data will give you a much better result, but you show them a process of transparency in how your model is built, in what your model actually is. It could be a very simple, cart model, but it has to be transparent. Like the investigator should, the regulator should understand what it does, like how does it make its decision. And the very fundamental aspect in a model are the features. These features must be understandable. Like that, I would say, is the golden rule to get a regulator to actually understand how AI makes a difference, is to make the features understandable, because then everything falls into place and it's intuitive for them to understand.
I think that's where also AutoDoc comes into the picture. AutoDoc is already integrated everywhere. So that gives out a fully regulated, regulatory friendly, so to speak, document for anyone that wants to investigate or probe into these.
Yeah, AutoDoc, I think, is news and the features. I think that would be amazingly useful, as a consumption device for regulators, because it keeps the model very transparent. It's able to take in all the feature sets that we have put in, and build a story around it. How much of a bigger story it can build, and then essentially provide that as information to the regulators for consumption.
We were also talking about being fatigued. As a data scientist, you're not most excited about writing documentation. You want to move on to the next model building task, and I think it's where the automation is helpful.
It is. I would agree with that. But the other aspect, this this of course is not something that people who build models like, and that includes me as well, is to document everything. It's like this, right? You've gone and done something really cool, and you're like, I don't want to document this. I mean, it's cool. That's where it ends. But that's not how it is, right? What I'm doing, the model that I build, is not for my satisfaction. It's for the satisfaction of someone else who sought my help, which means that our customer or clientele's organizations who work with us, it's for their consumption, which means that we must be very thorough in what we give them as information. Which essentially means that because the customer came to me for help, I must provide him or her with all the information that they can to understand that what we have built is something that they can trust. What we have built is something that they can rely on. And what we have built is robust enough to solve their problem. So which is one of the reasons, although we don't like it, we have to force upon ourselves to get these things done. I think that's where AutoDoc kind of helps us to a large extent. It fills up the large enough space. You can probably browse through it very quickly and tweak a few things, and that should probably solve your problem.
This has been an amazing interview full of many great insights. I know a lot of the audience is students, ML students, for them who are excited about machine learning, who have a good grasp of it, and now are itching to apply it to the domain that you're an expert of. What best advice would you have for them?
So one of the things I would say is try and get your hands on any kind of data set that you can, to familiarize with your domain and to familiarize with the data scientist, with the data science aspect of it, which is one thing that I do, to get an idea of what you do. And when you're familiarizing yourself with the domain, try and don't focus on the accuracy of the model. Focus on what is going into the model, so it gives you a much better, valuable result. I would say focus on that a bit more. And the next thing that I actually I feel very strongly is try and be a full stack data scientist as much as possible, because building these models are cool. Building a model is really cool, but solving someone's problem is much cooler. Which means that if you can build from model to a solution, an entire application, that's way cooler than building a model and saying, this is my shiny new object. So if you can follow these two things, as guidelines, I think that would be fantastic for people who are starting off.
Awesome. Before we end the call, what would be the best platforms to follow your work?
I think I wasn't expecting this question. It's because I don't necessarily put out information on a lot of platforms, but I think I rarely put things out on Twitter. When there are some good articles. Mm-hmm. Sometimes probably on LinkedIn, but H2O blog is a very much a good space to seek through what I write, because even though I write a few things, there are people who will push me to publish it, so that helps me. I think that should be good enough to look through.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ashrith, for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks, Sanyam. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity. I would say to the audience, if there is any questions that they would have, please feel free to drop on the line, and we'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Leave them in the comments. We'll try to review and leave a reply to your reply.
Yes, I thought I would never get an opportunity to say that, but yes, leave them in the comments, please.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review, or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.